Okay. Greetings, compadres. Your mystery meat sandwich today is a quote by Melody Beattie, who's a good friend of mine. Just kidding. She's not. She has absolutely no idea who I am. But of course, I think we're good friends. So that counts, right? Okay, I'm just kidding. This is a couple of sentences from one of her 2014 meditations. And it's a book. It's from a book called Journey to the Heart, which is something that I picked up in rehab the second time. And it just really helped shape my interior work and all of that. So here it goes. Here's the little nugget for you to chew on today. Honor the journey your soul mapped out for you. Look back for a moment, reflect in peace. All parts of the journey are sacred and holy. Take time to honor this ending, and then let the next adventure begin. Let the journey unfold and let it be magical. So the reason I chose this selection today is because this episode is tying a bow on a series that we've been in about discovering the 9 Enneagram types. And as I said at the very beginning of the series, it was just a high level graze, if you will, being that I'm not any kind of an expert in this area. But I'm here to tell you true confessions. Like, I haven't even scratched the surface of how deep you can actually go with this learning and wisdom that you can gain over time and through exploration. And so for your chaplain's chat today, I have an extremely special gift. She said yes to coming on the show. So I am so honored. And I don't even know how to tell you in adequate language how much I have just really benefited from talking to her already. And so after I very first stumbled upon the Enneagram through Richard Rohr, I think it was a YouTube video actually, I just got this feeling like I can't believe how much is really out there to this. And, you know, the core motivations of why and how we communicate the way we do, what's going on with us. And I'm just going to wrap it up right here because I want her to talk. I'm doing too much talking. So here's the bottom line. We have the honor of closing out this series with an actual Enneagram advisor and transformationalist. So, compadres, I am thrilled to introduce you to Freya Kennedy. She's a transformationalist and an Enneagram advisor, as I just said, but I didn't want you to miss that. She's the expert. I'm not. So before deciding to start her own business, she's been caring for people, creating beauty, and encouraging personal growth in a variety of ways. She's nannied, facilitated yearly art markets, hosted monthly discussions on thoughtful living, and has worked several jobs with an emphasis on guest experience and hospitality. She enjoys time with her husband, 2 sons, not songs, sons, and a dog. She loves hearing people's stories, dancing, smiling, eating amazing food, and paddleboarding on Lake Crescent. Freya, welcome. So happy to have you here.
Yeah, it's so fun to be here. It's fun to hear your enthusiastic visionary come out even in the beginning. Right? Really
I can't help it. I know. Yeah. And P.S., this is a fun fact is so Freya is actually the sister of my friend Matt, who's the audio engineer for the podcast. Yay. He's the one who sometimes makes the quick-witted comments. So that was the longest, biggest introduction in the world, but I'm thrilled to have you here. And, you know, I'm just wondering, I loved a phrase that you used with me the first time I talked with you on the phone, which was, I said, you know, something like, how did you stumble upon the Enneagram? Or said something like that. And you said the Enneagram found you. And I loved that. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I didn't create that phrase.
That's okay.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I wasn't my creativity that came up with that. But I loved it because it just sounds more meaningful. And to answer your question, I think that I've always been a seeker since as long as I can remember, asking questions, trying to understand why people do different things. And we're in the same family, for example, and we just had the same experience, but why did I do this and you did that? And why do I feel this and you don't? So I think it's been a lifelong seeking to connect with this work. And how, I think I shared this with you already, but many people will say, and this was 10 plus years ago, have you heard about the Enneagram? And I would, no, and they'd just type me. I think you're a this. And it was really off-putting to me. I didn't like the approach. So I sort of, and this is to my type, I rejected it. And then through also my type, through relationship, I was meeting with another friend of Matt's, my brother, and who you just introduced as well. She approached it in a more invitational way and suggested I take an online assessment. And I did. And the way that it was presented to me was much richer and more meaningful than any of the other things I had encountered. And I'm talking about in the realm of psychology and personality and spirituality, things like that. So that was the door opening. And then, yeah, I think I read Roar's book. And then just unfolded from there. The world begins to open up and more comes to you. And how I find myself where I am today was that as I engaged the Enneagram more, it just kept calling, and it's connected to my purpose. It answered something deeper inside of me. And so then I sought out, programs and certifications and workshops, and it's just, there was a deep yes inside of me of, yeah, this is connected to your purpose.
I love that. A deep yes. I love that. Okay. So the other day when you and I were talking, we started out, we did a breathing exercise that you presented. And I just thought that was it was powerful for me because, I think that our breath is the one thing that kind of requires no charging device, no extra equipment, no extra planning, training. And it's the one thing that we've been doing, since our birth consistently, and we can do it when we're sleeping and we don't, have to have a special license for it. And so, I got a sense after we did that exercise of just being really loving towards ourselves. And launched into talking about that, how being present was one of the many ways of doing that. And I thought it was really special and really amazing. So I was wondering if you could, speak to being present and or self-love, whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think so. I just completed a year-long program studying with Russ Hudson and Jessica Dibb, and then exposed to a huge variety of leaders in the Enneagram world. So at the foundation, what I learned from them, the foundation of transformational work in the Enneagram is presence, and presence in all three centers of intelligence. So the body, heart, and head, that we want to learn to be with what is in the moment in each center of intelligence. And we get there by being with our breath. And you build first in the body, get present in the body through sensation and just tuning in. It's not efforting. It's not, there's no wrong or right way. And so you first begin to build presence in the body through sensation and tuning into your breath. And then you breathe into the heart center and learn to be present with what's there. And again, not attaching to anything or judging anything, but just noticing, and then breathing into the head center and then into all three. And it's intentionally stacked that way because the body is the grounding and sensation that supports the heart to be able, the heart is quite shy. And so it has to be supported enough to feel safe to come out. And then once the heart is present, the head is supported and doesn't have to do all the work. And it's putting us in a state of presence and not reactivity, and not running the stories of who we've been taking ourselves to be with our type. Just from my own personal experience, when I first started this, it's a 7-minute practice that we committed to doing at least once a day for the year. And I think for me, what I noticed right away was sort of a huge amount of grief at the realization that I'd really never been here my whole existence, that I'd never been present. And then a lot of sadness surfaced. And then what else was interesting is learning to observe my type pattern in presence. So when you're with what is, I began to notice my passion of my type, my mental fixation. And a lot of it is just learning to kind of build an inner observer with radical honesty and compassion, not taking any action, but beginning to notice. And so when the pride would rise in me, I learned to be with the suffering of my heart, which is our passion. And transformation just began to occur. So I think when we only enter this work through the head center and trying to understand, it is not a 3-centered approach to transformation. But when we take a 3-centered approach in presence, it's like the transformation occurs in that container, as opposed to efforting it all the time. And it's really opposite of our reactive, mechanical way of being. So yeah, does that kind of speak to what you were asking?
Absolutely. It absolutely does. And I was wondering, you mentioned that the heart center is shy.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
That is a really good question. I mean, I'm sharing what I experience and what I've
Yeah.
taught. So as to why, what I know about the heart center, it is where we find our value and meaning,
Ah,
where we find attunement to our needs and the needs of others, giving and receiving love. And it's where we find the depth and beauty and mystery of who we are. So how we're affected by this life is what the heart center also shows. And I think if it's not supported by the body, the other thing that comes to me in all honesty is our culture, probably a variety of cultures. I mean, I'm a really, and have always been a very sensitive person, and there are high and low sides to that. And part of the story I've taken in a really intellectually overvalued world is that my intelligence of my heart doesn't matter.
mm,
And in all honesty, even growing up in Christianity, taking in that message of the heart is deceitful above all else. I mean, so as I'm sharing that, what comes up for me is that it's not safe for the heart to not to be bold and to
mhm.
be out there. That being said, I don't know exactly why the heart's shy, but those are some guesses.
No, that is fantastic. And I so appreciate that. And I love what you said. I thought that was fabulous. We didn't touch on this yet at all in our conversations, but I grew up in a Christian home, and um, have a totally different view now of God after a deconstruction and a reconstruction of faith, and have really become more open-minded than I was back in the day. And it has done nothing but create a sense of limitless expansion for me. So that's exciting that, I just didn't know what I didn't know, which is that I had gotten a really small box.
Yeah.
And so it's just an interesting concept that, you can find the God of your understanding in all of this, and I love that you use the word seeker. And it's just such a lovely picture in my mind, of searching for God. And when we search, we find, generally in some way, shape, or form, I feel like. So
Yeah, and I mean, with the Enneagram, it's 9 different ways that we've disconnected from the source of these essential qualities. And we have the perception that we have to make that reconnection to the source. And the reality, and that's what creates why we think, act, and feel the way we do in the world. That creates our dominant type. So there's also the law of one involved there in the circle, in the symbol, which is we are all one, and we're one with the source of everything. And so it is a perceived loss, although feels very real to us all. But the oneness component is it's all already here. So while we're both identifying with seeking, which is beautiful and definitely real, it's all here already. Like this, the transformation to wholeness and oneness is actually just getting to what is already here. We're already whole, complete, but there's all this ego and coping and instinctual, to keep ourselves alive, that's built on top of our essence, our oneness, our wholeness. So the Enneagram gives like this beautiful, clear pathway to uncovering that and getting connected to that again.
And I love the idea of these instincts. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about it. And I just want to bring in, I am by no means an expert. I know more at this stage, but there's so much to know, and nod again to my great teacher, Russ Hudson, at the end of this intense year-long program. And he's like a founding father of the modern Enneagram. He says, there's still so much I don't know. And he's forging so much of the knowing. And so it was very beautiful to hear that. And so it's an endless, and the Enneagram is, eternally expansive. So it's never going to end, the knowing. And that's one of the beautiful things about it. Instinct. So I love to talk about it. It's a very exciting topic. So we have our dominant type, which is the number, and that's our personality. And then we have our instinct, and there are different views on this within the Enneagram world, and it's also constantly expanding as people dive deeper into it. But it's basically our instincts for survival, and they're biologically in us and animals. There are 3 of them. We have the social instinct, which is about my survival is connected to the collective's survival. It's not that I like to go to parties and be around people. I'm an extrovert. It can include that, but it's mostly around how am I participating and contributing to the collective to stay alive. It's about tending a bond and reading the air. So this is also developed in us before the age of like 18 months, but it's running to keep us alive versus a personality coping. So the social instinct has the fear of being ostracized. Like if I'm kicked out of the group, I will die. So we all have a dominant one, a one that's kind of a vacation spot in the middle, and then an instinct that's very blind to us that we don't connect with and don't utilize, and maybe make judgments about other people if they have it as their dominant and we have it as our blind spot. So that we talked about the social, then you have the self-preservation instinct, and the boundary then is around me, just the individual, and it's around maintenance and resources, my nest, my home, and self-care in the way of, am I eating, do I have food, shelter, and water? Am I getting enough sleep? Do I have enough money, any resources there? And the fear is obviously if I don't have those things, I'm going to die. And then the sexual instinct includes sex, but isn't about sex only. It's about attraction and attracting, and that can involve anything, a person or some food or a subject, or it's around the edge of exploration, and it's around merging in that plug, looking for an outlet, what's got the juice for me. And the fear associated with that instinct is if I am undesirable, I will die. And it's not preferences, it's literally if this is my dominant instinct running, then I'm not going to survive if these things aren't coming, these needs aren't being met. And so when you combine that instinct with your personality, your dominant type, it creates its own expression. And this is why one of the many reasons why we don't type other people based on external behaviors, because just these two things, it's so complex. And many of us are not in touch with this in ourselves either. So a lot of the work of the Enneagram is actually getting really curious about what we don't know about who we think we are.
I love that so much. So when you and I were talking the other day, so I come up as a 7, being my dominant number, dominant type. And we were talking about the wings. And I gotta confess, I never really understand the wings. I thought the wings were probably totally off base and wrong, but kind of the way that I looked at life, like, do I look at life in the present tense? Am I looking more toward the future, or do I look to the past? But that it sounds like no.
No, I mean, that is part of your type. There are 3s, 7s, and 8s are future oriented types. So they're looking toward the future. I think I can't remember. I think 1s, 2s, and 6s are present, and then 4, 5s, and 9s are past, but don't 100% quote me on that. I for sure know the 7 is a future oriented type. What wings are if you're a bird, the body of you is your dominant type, and then the numbers on your left and right on the symbol are your wings. And what this is about is, and in some language, your wing is called your subtype. So, and then in other language, it's about your instinct. So it depends on the school of thought that you follow. And again, the essence of the Enneagram is saying, like, everything belongs, even seemingly opposing ideas. So it's beautiful, like, find what lands for you in the different schools of thought. But with the wings, where I'm at in my process about it is, over your life, you've had to lean on one of those numbers more to survive. So I have a dominant type 2. I have a 3 wing. Most of my life, I've had to stretch in and borrow from qualities of the 3 to help me survive and be successful in my life. And I don't mean gain success. Then I have one on the other side of me that I'm married to a one. So I often don't have to reach into that part of myself because he overdoes it. So that's another component. But I can consciously choose to begin to integrate both numbers and stretch into which one I need when I need it. But it does, just like the instinct, but in a different way, it flavors your dominant type a certain way. Yet another reason why we can't look at someone and say they're a this or a that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I even get this little like picture of, I think the phrasing that you used was something along the lines of, the wing to survive, that you've used a little more of one side or the other to survive. And I love that kind of picture of, like a bird will come along and, help lift up what needs to be lifted with this big wing. And I don't know, I think that's a beautiful, picture of, how we kind of navigate this life until, we sort of are made aware of some of these, motivations. And I don't know, I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, you can't consciously choose something different until you understand who you've been taking yourself to be and limiting, really. But the compassion piece is like, again, we're not getting rid of anything. We're just disidentifying with who we've been taking ourselves to be and begin to integrate all of who we are, which is all 9 types, as one whole person.
Mm.
So while I'm a dominant 2, you're a dominant 7, I have 7 in me, you have 2 in you. And it's like, can we begin to get to the point of self-awareness where we can pause in presence and consciously reach into the part of ourself that is most appropriate or needed in the moment. And sometimes that is our dominant type. So it's not something that we rid ourselves of, although it does cause us suffering when we over-identify with it and only use it and think that's all of who we are.
Mm. So these types they're from birth, are they with us, or okay, and then
Well, anywhere from like conception to the age of 2 is what I have learned. Is that it's developed from conception up to age 2. So nature and nurture, we all have a perceived disconnection from the source. And 9 different ways we're suffering at that loss of connection and trying to reconnect it
from the source. So here's a little question for you. When we talk about this right now, when we talk about feeling disconnected from the source and such a young age that this kind of happens, and that we're kind of, having these formative patterns, are developing. I don't know, I'm probably wording this terribly, but
you're great.
okay. So, and I wonder what this is in me. I'm actually just thinking about this out loud, but
yeah,
that stresses me out as a mother to hear that, because it makes, and I totally know that, like, I mean, I'm not that powerful that it's like me, going to necessarily be the one driving force that influences like my under 2-year-old child, which I don't have any anymore anyways, but of that age. But it's this odd, like, gosh, I hope I didn't screw them up, or like maybe I didn't hold them enough or held them too much, or that kind of runs through my brain. And I'm wondering, is that common, or
It's
Um,
common for me. I mean,
okay.
I really appreciate you bringing that up and sharing that. I mean, it's a sorrow, right? When we
Mm,
learn this, it's like, oh, and we're mothers. Um, I've definitely had that and continue to have it the deeper I learn. And that's just another invitation into something that you and I need to sit within ourselves,
mm,
that it shows our deep love for our children, that we would not want to be able, we want to be able to give them everything they need and to survive and to thrive. And the human condition is that no one has ever been given that
mm,
any other, even when there's the most love and best intent. And what I have found, I can just share from my own experience in that process, is as I become awake to those things, I talk to my kids and try to open up the conversation to give them the opportunity to say, I didn't get this met from you. I know, though, that I'm not the source of everything. And more importantly, I'd like them to be connected to themselves, to be able to give themselves what they need and
mhm,
didn't get. And also whatever divine source, however they would connect with it,
mm.
um, and then be open to repairing anything that, in my process, I'm still not completely connected to my wholeness, but being able to say, hey, I just realized, for example, in one of the programs I was in, it was like, what emotions were okay to have in your family of origin.
Mm,
So I was looking at my own, and then I was like, well, what were they for ours? And so I realized, because of my own pattern, I didn't allow anger
mm.
in our family. And so I went and talked to both of them and said, hey, I just had this realization, and I'm wondering how it impacted you. Are you aware of it? Did you, so we just ended up having a really great conversation about it. And it's that radical honesty and compassion piece when this stuff comes up again.
That is so beautiful. Um, and something happened just last night that is along these lines that I know he would be okay with me sharing, but one of my kids um, was writing a school paper, and it was basically talking about a significant happening in your life, that changed you. And his was pretty traumatic. That's my perception of it, because what he chose to write about, and he was like, Mom, I have to share this with you. I need to read this to you, which is a gift in and of itself. So we sat down and he's reading it, and it was all about, him as a young child when I got pulled over for my DUI with him in the back seat, and all of the things that he remembered around that, the emotions that he thought that I was displaying, everything from his perception. And it was so moving for me because I had never heard that before. I've done an amends process with my kids around all of that. Uh, but I had never heard truly what those moments were like for them. And it was so brave, I thought, and it was just so powerful. And I was so honored that he would share that. And then he went on to say how my recovery journey was inspiring for him, and it helped him to change the trajectory of how he was going in a time when he was kind of having a really rough time and experiencing a lot of emotions that he didn't know how to handle. And um he was just so, it blew me away, and it was like, gosh, the past can be my greatest asset. And yet at the same time, how lovely and how beautiful that he felt like he could share that traumatic incident and talk about it, and that he was able to reframe it because he did that. It wasn't me, and it wasn't, it was him. And it just was, I'm like still processing the whole thing. Um, but it was weird because it was very, it was eye-opening. And in the 11 years and change that I've been sober, I've never, ever heard, from my kid's perspective. I was really proud of him for walking through that and for talking about it and writing about it. And it was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, what comes up for me as you're talking is just like how everything belongs. So when you're like kind of grieving, maybe I didn't give my kids what they needed. Interestingly enough, that as you were even in the unhealthier expression of yourself, and it impacted and he took in some messages, right?
mm,
Your process of also sharing as openly your healing actually showed him a fuller picture of what it is to be a human,
mm,
because he is also a human that struggles and suffers in his own way, and
mm,
saw a parent model struggling, rupturing and repairing, and that's actually, or Roar talks about death and resurrection, it's a constant process, and we need to get good at that cycle. And you modeled that. So it's not about being this perfect parent that can give them everything they need, John, on the spot,
mhm,
but rather modeling how to be with our own suffering and find healing. It's not, the goal isn't to not suffer, because that's the guarantee of this human experience. So it's really beautiful to me that you've created, that everything belongs, even the stuff that we feel just terrible about,
mm,
that really devastates us and
mhm,
feels like the absolute worst thing,
mhm,
can be continually used
mm.
for like the fodder for the healing, and then it
Yeah.
transmits healing. And so, yeah, that's really beautiful. I appreciate you sharing that.
I love that whole idea of being with our own suffering too, because it's like we're always, I shouldn't say we, I, in my experience, have always been taught to look for something external
Yeah.
to heal my suffering.
Yeah.
It was never a question that the healing, whatever it was, would be external. It was always like, and you mentioned earlier, oh, the heart's deceitful. And it's like I grew up with those messages too. And it was a new concept for me to even consider that maybe the healing was actually just in here within me.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, that brings up a lot for me as you say that, like, just from my own lens and my own type, you know, I believe like if I love you and help you and respond to you, then I'm going to get love.
Mm,
And I never did. Even if, in my class, Russ said about twos, they're out there in everybody else's hearts. And so when someone actually does it, give them love, they're not at home in their own heart to receive it.
mm,
And because I was feeling completely looking outside of myself, I was like looking for love in all the wrong places, right? And then I learned to look for love in all the right places, which was all within myself. And one of the things they said in the program is like, you are who you've been waiting for.
mm,
And I've found that to be so true and so counter to what the messages I took in from our culture, from Christianity, from romantic movies, and I'm not saying I've like achieved that. I still leave my own heart. I still look for it outside of myself. But the more I have learned to give myself the love that I think I need to give everyone else, the actual more love and bigger receptivity I have for it. So when someone shows me love and appreciation now, I'm actually capable of receiving it and letting it in more than I ever have in my life through this work. And it would be the same for different types in their own ways. Looking for security or looking for possibility or looking for empowerment outside of yourself all the time, and then once you find it, it's all there, right there within you. And you're not the source of it. It's way beyond you, but you are one with the source of it. So it's just like tapping into the mainframe or whatever. It's so different. It's hard to explain once you're there. It's just, the shift, that it's like eating imitation strawberry your whole life, thinking it's strawberry, and then eating a real strawberry.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense. It makes total sense. And to me anyway, and you can start to see kind of the fingerprints, I think, of some of this stuff as we kind of remain open and looking and researching for it, and then just kind of standing back and detaching from outcomes, and just kind of like accepting the process as it's coming. And yeah, fascinating. Okay, so another question I have kind of along those lines is, how can we be with our suffering? What are some like tips on how to kind of start to even encapsulate that process, which is huge?
Yeah, wow, that's a really good question. Well, first you have to find it, and you can, it's laid out through your type, which is nice. So once you can find your type, you can see that, the 7 gluttony is the suffering of your heart at the loss of connection from the source of possibility, freedom, and joy. So then in the presence practice, this is one way, I'm sure there's a million ways, but as you do the presence practice, you can start to feel, because the passion, the suffering's in the heart, so learning to be with what gluttony is in your heart and breathe with it. But you have to show up first. You have to be here to start to feel it. And then you can sense it in your day. I think then you begin to tune in to know what it feels like. And what you usually do as a 7 is like, oh, here it comes. So then I'm going to react to the suffering and just get more. Little is good, more is better. What else could I fill my empty heart with? My starving heart. That's the quality of the 7, is the starving heart. I have to fill my heart up. And so instead of going into the reactivity of the pattern, just for 1 3-second period to start out with, breathe when that gluttony is there. Let it be there. Be with it. So that's one way. You can also, some other there are certain practices, and then there's also, I do somatic work. I was trained by Marianne Gilbert in somatic Enneagram. So you can go into the body intelligence, and learn to find where your body's holding different kind of contractions of suffering, and find a resource within yourself that's not in a contraction to meet it. And it's with breath. Wow. So a lot of it, I think, is breath and presence. And I think we need each other to be with our own suffering too. having someone to hold space for our suffering when we have the courage to touch it for a little bit or a long bit.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think on Tuesday when we were chatting, I was talking about how that's always, my first instinct is if I'm feeling like I'm suffering in any way, shape, or form, you know, fight, flight, or freeze, I'm like out. I just want to look for the escape route immediately. And it is really hard for me to conceptualize sitting with the suffering. But you hear it in so many different ways, like the Buddhists, that's big for them is welcoming the feelings. I'm thinking of Rumi's poem, The Guest House, and
Mhm.
talking about how, when we welcome these feelings in, we sit with them, we process them, we don't shove them away. And it's just a fascinating, like, oh, yep, I would like to look more into that for myself because I totally get that gluttony thing as a 7, trying to fill the hole in my soul, money, men, mansions, whatever it was when I was in my crazy, drinking days. Now it's different stuff, but it's still stuff. I mean, I can kill, 2 hours just like binge shopping online or on Amazon. So,
Yeah, and they're like taking small aims
mm,
is really probably the only way that we get to begin to build the capacity to be with it. It's not all at once. We couldn't handle it. And again, there's so many reasons. The reason why all those behaviors exist is because it's so painful for us, right? So it's it's what it is. It can be here too, but there's just like, yeah, just start to even notice that you have some. And then the flight response, sometimes you need to let yourself consciously flee.
hmm,
It's not always fleeing is like coming online as a threat to your survival. So sometimes you need to let yourself flee. Like, for example, I was observing a somatic Enneagram process with the 7, and she wanted to flee. And so the facilitator said, get up and run around your room right now. Let the cycle of fleeing complete itself so it doesn't get stuck in your body and contracted.
wow.
So, but it's conscious fleeing as opposed to shopping fleeing, right?
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
just different orientation, different relationship with it. And but little tiny small aims toward it to build toward deeper,
Mhm.
ability to be with it longer. And yeah, I think just being willing, honest, and compassionate are those three: presence, willingness, honesty, and compassion. Those are kind of the qualities to show up to this work with. I mean, there's a million others: curiosity, beginner's mind, things like that. But having the ability to just observe, oh, this is gluttony. Because half the time I'm still asking myself, is this pride? Is
Mhm.
this my is this what that is? Because it's our companion.
Right.
It's so familiar that we can't even recognize our passion half the time. And that's why it takes other people that have those same qualities to support us to say, yeah, they have more clarity because they're not suffering with the same thing. But if
Mm.
you turn around and talk to them, they can't find their passion as easily. It's so much of this is hidden to us. And the ego is so threatened by this work. And we need our ego. We needed it to construct a self, right? But now we're just like, hey, ego, you can be here, but you don't get to run everything. But it sure freaks out when we show up to be more living from our essence.
Yeah.
It's a
I bet.
it's a hard process. This is so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. But it sounds like to me, if we can kind of shift into, I want to hear about, your business and what you do. If people want to get deeper into this, it sounds like part of what you do is create that safe space for people to process some of these things.
Yeah, thank you. I want to. I think part of that comes from I'm doing this work every day in myself. And so I'm familiar with the territory. And again, through my own type lens and whatnot, I have preferences and biases with that. But yeah, I want to create a safe place that's inclusive and inviting and curious and compassionate, which I do think I provide. But basically, yeah, I work with individuals and couples and corporate teams and small businesses and nonprofits, and I love variety. That's that 7 in me.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I think what I find the most, well, I find it all fulfilling. But I do, yeah, you work with an assessment tool where the individual would take an assessment, which you did, the
Mhm.
175 questions, and it creates a report coming up with what's most likely your dominant type. And then we debrief that. And then if you want it, some people, that's enough. And they just sit with it for a while. I find though that really it's best to continue doing one-on-one coaching. And in those sessions, we come up with whatever's here right now. And I find the somatic work to be the most effective and powerful if people are open to it.
Mm.
But I also can come up with we just can come up with practical, curiosities, observations, uh, questions to work with. But I do some movement. It's very varied and really kind of catered to the individual. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, I collaborate with other people too to do different things, offerings. I don't know. Did that answer that?
100%. It did. It did. I
It's
just,
really hard to answer.
I bet. Yeah. Yeah. No. And it sounds like, you're able to kind of customize, to the situation or whatever. And that's fabulous. I mean, it just makes me think of all the different people and their different experiences. And, people come to you as they are at the place in their life where they are. I find that at least with sponsoring through 12-step work. And um, I used to be really kind of like, this is how I do it. And now it's like, okay, let me watch and see where they're at. I want to meet them where they're at. And then, because
Yeah.
that's where they are, and it's just kind of an interesting, it's a newer concept for me, growing up in sort of some more dogmatic ways of doing things and ways of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things they taught in another program was like 70% of your attention needs to be on your own being as a coach and be present. And so then you're really with your client, but you're also really aware of what's going on in you. And
Mm.
you can distinguish and then receive what they need, instead of, I think for me in the past, I thought I have to know what they need. So like I would read up on the type and make sure I just crammed it all in before they showed up. And I put all this pressure on myself. And in doing so, I actually, and this is also part of my type, is that I would create like what I thought they needed.
Mm.
And then when I started working more with presence, I find that it's spacious, letting them, I'm here to just help them tune into themselves and then maybe ask some curious questions that deepen that connection with themselves so that they have everything within themselves to find, to support what they need. And I know some things and I can make some connections, but I think where I'm at right now in my work is like, how do I help you find more of you to
Right.
support you? You know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which is really, really beautiful to witness. It's very, I'll use this word intentionally. It's very sacred work.
Mm. So Freya, I totally feel like we've literally been going for almost an hour. I feel like it's been 5 minutes.
I know, right?
You are amazing. I am very thankful that you came on here. I'm thankful that I met you. I look forward to, working with you beyond this and in a coaching scenario, because I would love to learn more about how to, get there myself with my type, my sevenness.
Yeah.
And I just have to say that my heart is super full. I feel like my soul is illuminated. And thank you so much for everything that you brought to us today. And I just want to send you so much love and light and just gratitude. And one thing I want to ask is, where can people find you? It'll be in the show notes and all that good stuff, but
Sure. Yeah. At freyakennedy.com. So Freya Kennedy.com. And you can find my contact info through that. Yeah. I have an Instagram, but I'm not really active on it. So yeah, just through my
that's the best place.
website.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And to everybody listening, remember, be kind, rewind, and thank you for the honor of your time. Take what you like and leave the rest behind.